Hi, and welcome back to Your Future, Your Finances. I'm your host, Brian Kuhn. We're continuing our conversation with attorney Steve Lewicky regarding employment law here in Maryland. Good segment, definitely an informative segment if you are a business owner or an employee, regarding some recent federal court rulings that had changed the rules, so to speak, for lack of a better explanation. So welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Brian.
So we were talking last time about this federal court ruling changing basically something referred to as joint employment, or what happens when there's overtime of an employee. Is that correct?
Clarifying the rules, that's right. Mm-hmm.
So what's, for anybody who missed the first segment, what's a summary of that rule change?
Well, a quick summary is that an employer has to be very careful if that employer is in some ways directing the employees of another entity. So if you're a general contractor and you have a subcontractor who has its own employees, if you as the general contractor are giving a high degree of direction about what to do or schedules or hours, there's a possibility that you as a general contractor could inadvertently be held legally responsible if that subcontractor fails to pay required overtime pay to its workers.
Yeah, so definitely something business owners of the contractor or subcontractor need to be aware of. Are there other scenarios that this law affects?
Well, there are, and one thing I want to say about the subcontractor relationship is an important thing that the court found was that no matter how well documented or legitimate the contractor-subcontractor relationship is, that doesn't provide a defense to these wage and hour questions. You can have the most beautifully drafted subcontractor agreement making very clear that you're a separate entity from the contractor. That's important for other areas of legal enforcement, but for wage and hour, it doesn't matter. The test, broadly speaking, is how much control the two entities are exercising over the workers' activities and schedules and things like that.
Yeah.
So the other area that's important in this joint employment is franchisor-franchisees. And this has been a real focus of franchising companies in recent years. So if you're a franchisor of, let's say, a restaurant, if you're making something up, let's say Jimmy's restaurant franchised out of Wisconsin, and you've got local restaurants around the country, well, of course, the line workers are working for those local restaurants. But if you as the national franchisor are going pretty far down the road of directing things like hours and exactly what the workers are doing, and certainly schedules or things like that, you as the national franchisor could be jointly responsible if that local restaurant isn't paying required overtime. And as you can imagine, if you have a big franchise operation, that could be substantial liability, and without perhaps knowing what those local companies are doing as far as paying wages, you as the national franchisor could be on the hook. So I would definitely recommend that franchise companies look very closely at the amount of control that they're exercising over the franchisees' employees.
Yeah. So it sounds like a business owner, I mean, just in this one instance alone, let alone all the other stuff, has a lot of things to keep an eye on. So I guess that's where they hire somebody like you and keep in touch as the rules change. Absolutely.
Employment law is complicated, and it changes fairly often. So it's hard for a smaller business to keep up, and that's why firms like mine specialize in things like looking over employment manuals and employment practices to make sure that the small and mid-sized companies aren't inadvertently finding themselves responsible for things that they don't know about.
Are there industries that get in trouble more than others?
Well, in this particular area, of course, it's hourly wage industries. So restaurants, construction, all the other areas where hourly wages are being paid, and in this case, of course, by multiple entities. You've got multiple layers of entities that might or might not be controlling the wages and the hours of the worker.
Changing gears a bit, so in Maryland we're filming this in April of 17, and today's the day of signing a bunch of new rules, as I understand it from you. One of them is not the Paid Leave Act. What's that, and what's going on with it?
Sure. Well, the Paid Leave Act in Maryland has gotten a lot of attention this session of the legislature, which just ended. Basically, it requires many, if not most, employers in Maryland, if it goes into effect, to give paid leave to all their employees. And it's a relatively low threshold. It's 15 or more employees. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's basically the threshold. It's been opposed by business groups, by the Chamber of Commerce, opposed by the governor. It passed the legislature, The governor has said he's going to veto it. As of today, I don't think he has yet vetoed it, but he's presumably about to. And there's not enough, the legislature has ended for the session, so that means that the legislature will come back next session, next January, and have on its agenda an attempted override of the governor's anticipated veto. So stay tuned. Next January probably, there'll be a lot of attention as to whether the Maryland legislature overrides the anticipated veto by Governor Hogan of the Paid Leave Act.
What are some of the other areas of law you get into with businesses and helping them protect themselves?
Well, I do a lot of employment law, as we've been speaking of. I also do a lot of government contracting work, both creating the government contracts, but also contesting failure to pay by the government. That's a big part of my practice. And then also...
Failure to pay, the government doesn't pay?
Believe it or not, the government doesn't always pay. And of course, there are other issues that are a little more complicated, like software licenses and things like that. But it's a fairly... I mean, it's somewhat like a breach of contract in the private sector, but there are different rules. And in fact, there's a different court called the Court of Federal Claims that deals with that. So it's kind of a specialized practice. And the rest of my practice is kind of as a sort of outside general counsel for companies, supporting them in contracting and all manner of other things that come up with small, mid-sized businesses, including litigation that arises out of contracts and other things like that.
Fantastic. A website?
My website is www.lewickylaw.com, LEWICKYLAW.com.
Fantastic. All right, we've been speaking with Steve Lewicky regarding all matters employment law here in Maryland and abroad. That does it for this episode of Your Future, Your Finances. If you have any requested guests or topics to be discussed, email me at bcoon@psgclarity. Thank you very much.